Canarca was founded about 4 years ago. Our focus since founding is on energy, specifically a very special form of renewable energy, solar. And what makes it special, it's both a distributed energy source as well as a renewable energy source. And without question, our world has a grave and serious imbalance between supply and demand in all of our energy sources. Thus, we see all of the commodity prices moving upward and continuing to do so. So Canarca, since its founding, has been focused on energy. As chairman of the company, our vision is at the intersection of organic chemistry and energy. So I like to think of Canarca as a biotech company focused on energy. And our initial product development emphasis is to convert visible light through organic chemistry, through organic chemically derived materials into direct current, DC current. That's what a photovoltaic is, only we're using organic materials to do that. We also have advanced R&D in converting not visible but invisible, that is infrared radiation, into direct current. For the first time, the quest of a nighttime or thermal photovoltaic. And so forth. That is to convert different frequencies, different wavelengths in the electromagnetic radiation spectrum into not only usable energy in direct current form, but someday stored energy in the form of carbon bonds. This is what photosynthesis is. So if anyone thinks that I'm an entrepreneur who's out of his mind, I will say I have 100 million years of evolution to prove that someday man will figure out through organic chemical pathways how to make energy, store energy, transport it, and deploy it. Mother Nature's already figured it out. And of course, all of our fossil fuels are nothing but organic material breaking carbon bonds. So let's just figure out how to make carbon bonds, because we sure as heck know how to break them. And then ultimately converting one form of energy to another through organic chemical pathways. In highlight of Canarca, we're now about 45 employees. We're headquartered in beautiful, soon-to-be snowy, downtown Lowell, just minutes out of Boston. Our headquarters in Germany are in Nuremberg, which is the energy center for Germany. It's where Siemens has its power and transmission group. We also have laboratories in addition to Boston, Germany. We also have labs in Austria and support labs in Switzerland. We began as a spin-out of both the University of Massachusetts and the University of California, Santa Barbara campus. It's a pleasure to see and to always hear Professor Cohn. Last night I listened to the other professor, your fellow Nobel laureate, Alan Heeger, who's my co-founder. So Alan is our chief scientist. He's on the board of Canarca. He and I co-founded Canarca and organized it about 5 years ago. So I'm more than pleased and enthused to be on this campus because we spun out of UCSB just as we did UMass. So as I said, our initial product focus is to develop a low-cost, roll-to-roll manufactured photovoltaic material using organic materials that can be a paradigm shift in the cost structure for solar. And we've accomplished that. We can coat and print photovoltaic modules made from organic materials. To your left is a coated module. The individual stripes are cells. They're interconnected in a roll-to-roll continuous process. This is manufactured off of our pilot in Lowell. And to the right is the same, only islands that are printed, and this was done off of our pilot coater in Germany. So we've already demonstrated it works. We're now just making it work better at lower and lower cost. Here's a photograph of the coating line in Boston. It's much simpler than using semiconductor processes as we now do to make photovoltaics, much more energy efficient. It's a continuous scalable roll-to-roll process. And what we mean by replicable is it's terribly important for many nations to have the ability to produce their own energy products. And so having processes that can be manufactured in both developed as well as developing nations is obviously a very important part of the government's policy for their futures for energy. And we believe this process can be replicated in a variety of nations around the world. The applications are numerous. They're consumer applications for textiles, for all the portable electronics that we carry, commercial applications in sensors and meters and the like. Of course, off-grid applications for battery recharging for civilian as well as military and federal and emergency response applications. The developing world, the developed world, residential, commercial, big box retailers. You know, we did a calculation. If Walmart were to put 10% efficient photovoltaic on all of its stores' rooftops, it would be the second largest electric utility in America. Surface area. It's all about surface area. That's what photosynthesis is. A lot of leaves, a lot of surface area. I just wanted to include a slide in sort of setting the tone for this conference as to beyond Canarca, which has, and we'll announce next week, we raised another $20 million. So we've raised $60 million in venture capital since our founding. We have investors from both Europe and, of course, the leading investors in the U.S., both in Route 128 and many in the Silicon Valley. Some that are nanotechnology focused, materials focused, like NGen Partners here in Santa Barbara, but some of the largest and most prestigious venture funds. And most recently, our funding, which closed last week, led by 3i Ventures, which is a global fund around the world. So there's a lot happening. As I said earlier to some of my fellow entrepreneurs and colleagues in this industry, you don't move battleships, you don't turn battleships, too quickly. But there is definitely a sea change occurring. And why is that? Well, of course, here there are federal policies, but certainly very influential and pre-staging state initiatives in the western states like California, Arizona, New Mexico, but certainly in the eastern states, my home state, or actually where I work, but in Massachusetts and North Carolina and elsewhere. So subsidies, incentives, state initiatives, RPS standards, this has all been happening and continues to happen. Likewise, as I'm sure you're all aware, similar things have happened on a national basis in many of the EU nations, led by Germany, of course, but now more recently France, Spain, Greece, Italy have all passed very important and very innovative renewable energy federal policies. I did have a joke with Senator Sununu, who I know well. I joked with him that China would pass a renewable energy and a federal energy policy act before America did, and it's wonderful that our Congress finally did pass one, but I won the bet. I called them up and said, China did it before you did. So there is, of course, this grave imbalance, as was pointed out, with the growth in China and the demand from China and India. And so this is a continuing pressure. It won't change. It will get worse. So it's not just the supply interruptions that occurred because of two devastating hurricanes. The demand from Southeast Asia, from the developing world, continues to put, for decades to come, pressure on all fossil fuel, all energy stores. As VCs know in this audience, and I know personally as an entrepreneur, the telecom and IP, the internet meltdown, has caused very large venture funds sitting on enormous amounts of money to look for alternative places to invest their money for return to their limited partners. And as such, a lot of capital has been searching for, a lot of venture capital has been searching for other industries to invest in, and renewable energy and clean technologies, environmental technologies, have been the recipient of a good portion of that new interest in venture capital. So even the generalized venture capitalists have been investing in a big way, particularly in the last 2 years, and that will continue. Canarca and other leading nanotechnology and innovative materials companies have certainly benefited also by investment in new materials, research, and much of it, a good deal of it, off of the UC campuses, including leadership here in Santa Barbara. Likewise, it's not just Jeff Immelt, although I have tremendous respect for General Electric and its announced leadership as a Fortune 50 company, but I can assure you, without violating NDAs, and Canarca soon will announce a relationship with a Fortune 50 company, as we already have relationships with Fortune 100 and 1,000 companies, that the boardrooms and CEOs of the largest companies in the world are regularly talking about their future energy, their energy initiatives for their own businesses, not just on the saving side, not just on the demand side, but what energy businesses, what energy technology, renewable energy and clean energy businesses they will be in. So it's not just GE, it's the United Technologies of the world, it's the Honeywells, the Siemens, the Tycos of the world. All of their boardrooms and their CEOs and executive staff are plotting what their futures will be investing. What makes our solar different is current processes use very noxious materials in solar. The thin films are made with selenium, gallium, cadmium. We make it with organics. There is certainly an environmental aspect to what solar needs to solve. You know, let's not go from the frying pan into the fire. You know, we introduced asbestos in insulation. We introduced lead into paint. Let's be a little bit wiser about what materials we introduce into building materials for future energy generation on America's rooftops, and for that matter, around the world. It's hard for me to fathom that the Almighty thought that the way to solve energy was to put carcinogens and toxins into our materials and make energy from them. So I personally do not believe that any future for energy, or I should say, should be conscious of what materials are being used for our future. As I mentioned, Konarka's materials are based on nano-engineered, environmentally acceptable materials. There's no toxic materials. None of our materials, none of our components even come close to LD50. We use environmentally friendly solvents and low-emission materials in manufacturing. We don't process at high temperatures, so therefore it's much more energy efficient. We don't need clean rooms, therefore again it's more energy and capital efficient. So in summary, Konarka's flavor of solar for the future is a shift from silicon to plastic. We are one of the leading nanotechnology companies of the world. That's our engineering of the materials. In theory, Alan Heeger and others will say 30% or greater efficiencies. Practically, we believe we can get over 20%. People always ask us, where are you? Well, we're closer to 10% than we are at 0%. And every year, our efficiencies keep going up. We are ahead of everyone else in the world, both academic and commercial efforts in competition to Konarka. That's not good enough for me as CEO. Konarka wants and will get over 10% efficiency from our materials. It's a roll-to-roll process. Just like photographic plates used to be glass and heavy, they used to be made from glass and silver halide deposited and metal frames. If you think about what a photographic plate looked like 110 years ago, it looks like a solar cell today. But yet you can walk into any drugstore and buy a 3-cent strip of Kodak film in a package that costs more than the film. So how in 100 years do we get from photographic plates to a 3-cent emulsion-coated strip of polyester film? It's about roll-to-roll, large volume manufacturing. That's how we're going to drive down the cost of solar. Again, environmentally acceptable organic materials. We don't make the products, we just make the products make energy. We have the BASF model, and I think it's a proven business model. Solar is one of the fastest growing electronics segments in the world, if not the fastest growing electronic product in the world. But energy is the largest industry in the world, $7 trillion. A lot of headroom for Konarka to grow. We've already announced partnerships with leading companies in the US and Europe. We'll be announcing our partners throughout the year in Asia. We're partnered with DuPont, with Siemens, with Merck, with Kurtz, one of the largest printing companies in the world. And we'll announce who our Asian partnerships are, as I say, in the coming year. Funded, and I'm proud of it, the leading venture funds in US and Europe. A very experienced management team with over 200 years of industrial experience. And I don't know what world-class is, but if a Nobel laureate off this campus ain't world-class, then I challenge you to tell me what world-class is. We have the leading scientists in this field of science in US and Europe who are part of a prestigious team of 30 PhDs and growing, working on Konarka's organic PV. Thank you very much, and I appreciate this opportunity.
Delighted to be able to give you some background on wind power. And I'd like to discuss on the implication of wind power in solving world problems, some world problems, and also talk about the factors of technical, socioeconomic, and political impacts, both positive and ones that impede. The technology is one that's been evolving since the 1980s, and it went through a period of very difficult times as we got into the 1990s, and essentially the industry shifted offshore. And it's a sad comment because it was really Uncle Sam's funds that caused the birth of the industry. And the reason for that is that there was a lot of discontinuity in policy in the U.S., supporting and then stopping and then supporting again. But what we have today is a technology that is really able to make a very serious contribution to the supply of electricity. And we believe we have a turbine that is state-of-the-art. It's one that is in production now in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. It's the result of an effort that we started in 2001. I started in the business in 1980, and so I've been kind of through the evolution of 3 generations of turbines, and this is the 4th one. If you look at the industry as a whole, it's been growing very rapidly now for about the last 15 years, up in the range of 20 to 30%. It's very interesting globally because there's such an abundance of wind resource around the world. So it has a potential of really making a very large contribution to the power supply. The industry today is running around $11 billion. The potential for penetration into electric grids in the advanced countries is on the order of 20 to 40%. I frankly think it'll be at the higher end of that range. In the U.S., there's enough wind power now that supplies over 2 million homes. Yes, wind is intermittent. There are times when you don't have wind, but as we see wind becoming more widespread, the need for backup power becomes much smaller. And a study was done in Minnesota that showed that with 1,500 megawatts of wind, the backup required for that area would be on the order of 8 megawatts. So it's really kind of an interesting thing that you end up getting a much more consistency in wind production as you get this geographic dispersion. And wind is very predictable on a shorter time span. It's intermittent. As you get into longer time spans, month to month, year to year, you have very high predictability. Most of the deployment has been land-based. However, in Europe, because of the high population densities, wind is now shifting to offshore, and that's where over the next 10 years it's expected that something on the order of 2/3 of the development will be offshore. The other thing that we're doing that's somewhat in the same category, harnessing a slow-moving fluid, wind, air, is ocean currents. And that's a technology we've been working on for a couple of years now, and we believe we have some opportunities for the U.S., particularly in the southeastern area of the U.S., where you have the Gulf Stream, to be able to supply fairly meaningful quantities of renewable energy by harnessing the Gulf Stream. And we're at a fairly early stage on that, but I think it has great promise. The The turbine that we're just now bringing to market is a 2.5 megawatt machine. And just to give you a sense of scale, you can see how it compares to the Statue of Liberty. The swept area of the rotor is around 1.5 acres, and this column of air that drives through the rotor drives the rotor. In the course of the year, has a wind run that's equivalent to about 4 times around the planet. So that is what drives the machine, and out of that you get the equivalent of about 12,000 barrels of oil per year in terms of what it would take to make electricity. So it's a fairly meaningful amount of power that you get from one of these machines. The 2.5 megawatts it's hard to relate to megawatts. So at peak power, which is around 25 miles an hour wind speed, it's around 3,300 horsepower. So as I mentioned earlier, 12,000 barrels per oil per year. That means 3 of these machines up in North Dakota or someplace in some of these windy areas over their 30-year lifetime will essentially contribute the equivalent of 1 million barrels of oil. The thing that's really helpful with wind power is that it's something that can be deployed fairly rapidly. Because of its modularity, you can bring on power as it's needed, and it can come on at a fairly good clip. In the early 1980s, in the course of 5 years, something like 20,000 machines were deployed. Those were much smaller machines, but it just gives you an idea that it's something that unlike many of the large central power plants that require many years of planning and then construction to be able to generate power 7, 8, or 10 years out, with wind you can bring it on at a fairly strong clip. The amount of wind power that's being developed around the world now is really starting to strain some of the heavy industry capability. We're finding now that we're having to go out to 5 of the major foundries around the world just to get the large castings. So in a way, it's helping to revive some of the smokestack industries, and this machine has about 500 tons of steel, so it's a fairly large amount of industrial input. The job creation aspect of it is on the order of 2.5 to 3 job years per megawatt. In terms of how wind can make a contribution, you look at the bigger energy picture, and with the developed nations, about 1/3 of the energy use is for electricity, another 1/3 is for transportation. We believe that wind can, of course, contribute in both of those areas. Short term, the benefits are essentially clean power, and that's pretty significant now, because bringing on particularly coal-fired plants means that you're essentially committing to 40 or 50 years of combustion of coal that, of course, is the most harmful to the environment in terms of the emissions and carbon dioxide emissions. The amount of wind power that we have in the U.S. today every year offsets a coal equivalent, if you can imagine, a train from Seattle to Miami of coal cars. And our wind penetration is very small still. So you can see that the potential to be able to make really meaningful reductions in emissions is significant with wind. Wind has become quite economic, and it's been something that's we've been working on for a long time to continue to drive down the cost of making electricity with wind to the point where it's now among the most competitive of the ways to make electricity. You look at those terms, the short-term considerations. Now let's look at some of the long-term. One is energy security, just the ability to reduce the amount of energy fuel sources that we need to bring from abroad. There were some comments made earlier with our 60-some% dependency now on imported oil. Now in the United States, you don't burn much oil anymore to make electricity, but around the world there's still a vast amount of diesel-powered electric generation that could be displaced by wind power. Wind is playing a very important role in some of the emerging economies, particularly India and China. China has a very aggressive program for wind with somewhere on the order of 10,000 megawatts actually in planning at this point. Another contribution for wind as we go along will be as we move from the very excellent fuel efficiency of hybrids to hybrid electrics. And in that case, what you would have would be the ability to charge the electric batteries of these hybrids during the nighttime periods when wind power is producing, energy consumption is low, electricity consumption is low, and use that to be charging batteries. And the effect that's been studied by some indicates that it would be on the order of 50 cents a gallon kind of benefit. Now that sounds pretty dramatic, and I think we'll see how it plays out. But the idea of using off-peak power wind generation for powering hybrids is a pretty interesting idea. And of course, the ultimate really is to use wind to produce hydrogen and hydrogen for transportation. Another thing that we're seeing now with wind is using it with reverse osmosis to produce water, and some of these projects are just starting now off of southern Spain. In terms of wind contributing to political stability, perhaps it's a bit of a stretch, but it is fairly consistent that areas where you have high resource exploitation, as with oil, you end up having governments that are pretty focused on conserving the benefits of that production for the benefit of few, causing this instability with a greater population, requiring then military to defend the position. And so this is something that we need to try to find ways to break that cycle. And to the extent that we can make countries more self-sustainable in their energy supplies, wind power can do that. It can provide jobs. It can keep the economics of that power generation at home, and it can keep it at a much more democratic level of economic distribution. And then I think probably the final point on the long-term implications of wider wind usage is just the whole thing of trying to conserve some of this energy, these fossil fuel sources, particularly petroleum and gas, for the generations ahead. And right now we're burning it with fuel efficiencies of 25, 30, maybe 40%. And we're using it in such vast quantities that we really are starting to reach a peak of where new oil that comes on, that is being, new discoveries are not keeping up with the rising demand for the product. And so making these resources available for future generations, for plastics, particularly aviation. I mean, we can cut down on transportation use of fuel, land-based, but for aviation, of course, is something that you're going to continue to need fossil fuels, and particularly petroleum. Let's see, I think I've covered most of these points. Let me just go forward. One of the most fundamental ways to look at the benefit of a generating technology is to look at it from the standpoint of how much energy do you put into it and how much energy do you get back out. And a coal-fired plant is on the order of 2.5 times input versus output. Hydroelectric is something on the order of 10 times. With wind power, on a 20-year life of a machine, you're around 35 times. The Clipper turbine's designed to a 30-year life, so it's on up around 45 or 50 times. So that's one approach to evaluating energy. With wind, another way, of course, is to look at the cost of the resource. And we've seen a fairly significant decline in the cost of wind. To a great extent, that's happened by just scaling up the turbines, where the increase in the rotor size and the ability to capture energy goes up exponentially, but the costs go up linearly, so the effect of that is to drive down the cost of the electricity. What we have on this graph are two curves. One is a curve showing very high wind sites, and you can see there that we're in a band of price competitiveness with conventional energy, and the challenge has been to go to areas of lower wind speeds, and that's a higher line on the graph. The significance of that is that most of the wind development that's taken place around the world has been in areas of very high winds, and the technology has advanced, and we've been able to do it with our turbine, to be able to go from these areas, they're called Class 6, Class 7 winds, down to Class 4 and Class 5 winds, to moderate wind speeds. Your geographic area increases 20-fold if you're able to do that. So the way the wind really becomes mainstream to the energy supply is to be able to tap into those areas. There's a number of scenarios on energy supplies from carbon fuels, and in the U.S. and we've seen the peaking of oil back in 1970. This is a graph that shows really peaking coming fairly soon. I mean, if we're not in it now, and with the curve being one of fairly slow ramping up and then being very steep on the downside, and we've seen this concern over maxing out on our ability to find new fossil fuel resources starting to reflect in the price of fuels. This is the price for natural gas For most of the last 25 years, gas has ranged in the $1.50 to about $2.50 per 1,000 cubic feet, and just last year it was up in the $8 to $9 range. It's currently up around $12 or $13. The Department of Energy has suggested that above $4, 600,000 megawatts of wind would become economically viable. That would be about 20% of our electricity supply. So I think the number's frankly a little bit higher than that, but in any event, and gas prices probably won't hold up that high for very long, but certainly there's a lot of people now, including a lot of utilities, that are, I think, taking the view that it's not going to be back down in the $4 or $5 range anytime soon. So then you look at what some companies have projected, and this is a graph that was put together by ExxonMobil, and it shows the amount of discoveries that have been made historically. And of course, during the 30s, most of those big oil fields were discovered, and then you had a lot of global discoveries going on through the 50s, 60s, and 70s. But then you see the overall decline in new discoveries, and yet production continues to rise. So this, I think, just adds to the concern that we're right at the point of, and you know, the point could be any time between now and 5 or 10 years from now, of rolling over between having new discoveries topping out, dropping off, yet our demand continues to rise at a very stiff rate. In terms of deployment of wind power, the things that are enabling to this is that the technology really is mature now. It's very reliable. The modularity allows it to be deployed rapidly. It's very compatible with with the operation of the electricity grids, and the ability to build these machines is something that is starting to rely on global sourcing. For the Liberty turbine, we're bringing blades from Brazil. We're making the main shaft in the Czech Republic. We're making the generators in Mexico, and so on. And this is pretty much the way the whole industry is going to global sourcing. The infrastructure for wind is supported by a fairly good transmission system in the U.S., although we are starting to see limitations on wind capability by transmission limitations. The other thing that we're saying is that many of the very big wind areas of the country are fairly distant to load centers, so new transmission will be required for the extensive development that could be ahead. The principal things that are an obstruction to wind development really is, in certain cases, there's an attitude that we don't want to see wind turbines, and the not in my backyard type of mentality. And I think that is something that probably is a carryover from the times that we've had of being able to feel like we've had a very good, easy life. We can dispose of things. We can be careless with the use of fuels and so on. And my sense is that the times ahead will see much more concern over being much more practical on how we use our resources. So I would expect the NIMBY attitude at some point will fade away as the concern over energy becomes stronger. The other main obstruction really is just the fact that the carbon fuel industries are so well entrenched and politically very strong, and of course resistant to change. I'd like to mention one other thing in terms of the NIMBY response, and that is that what happens to birds. And the avian factor is really a non-issue. In doing a wind project, you just don't. You do your environmental study. You don't locate a wind plant where there's a avian flyaway or a roosting area, that sort of thing. So it's really a non-issue. This is the map of the U.S. wind resource. The vast area for development really is in the Midwest, and that's where most of that activity is taking place now. So in terms of the political aspects of things that are enabling wind power development is the fact that the public is becoming much more informed. There's been very strong leadership in Europe because of higher energy prices and a much keener sense of the environmental damage of fossil fuels. In the U.S., there's been, at the state level, a fairly high degree of impatience with what's going on in Washington, so states have taken their own initiatives. There's now 22 states that have programs for implementing renewable energy generation in the states. The other thing, particularly in the last year, is kind of a waking up of the electric utility sector, where I think to a certain extent it's been driven by their consumers, where in many areas consumers have been willing to pay more for some amount of green energy in the power supply. But the other thing that I think is a very strong driver is just the fact that energy costs, particularly natural gas, have gotten so high that now utilities are starting to understand that wind can be a really an important part of their generation portfolio to help control long-term costs. In the United States, the thing that's been the most damaging to the industry has been the on-again, off-again policies out of Washington in terms of support for wind energy. It's been based on a 2-year tax credit that expires, the industry dies out, then it's brought back. It's now been instituted through 2007, then it'll expire again. And that discontinuity really has caused the industry basically to move mostly to Europe. And then of course the other thing is the fact that carbon fuels really have essentially an invisible subsidy, which is that they're able to emit pollution and carbon dioxide without a penalty. That is a form of subsidy that society gets to pay. And as a final comment, if you look at how quickly could wind be brought to bear to really make a difference in the energy supply, you look at Denmark, it now has about 23% of its energy from wind power. Germany, which started just in the late 1990s, has 61,000 people employed in wind. That's more than what they have had for coal-fired power generation, both in the extraction and in the plant operation. So wind has created great employment, and it's now making about a 16% contribution to the electricity supply in Germany. Spain is pretty much the same story. In the U.S., we started in 1980, and we're at about, we're under 1% energy contribution with wind. But I would expect that'll be changing. Thank you very much, and appreciate the opportunity.
I've been told to keep it fairly quick, so I won't, as a Canadian, I won't tell you any of my comments about U.S. politics. This photograph I took in Germany a little over a year ago. Each of those piles is 1,000 tons of straw. In the pile at the right, you see half the pile. 2,000 tons of straw a day is what you need to feed one 50 million gallon cellulose ethanol plant. As we heard earlier, if the United States is going to have 25% renewable fuels from cellulose ethanol, they will require 1,000 of these 50 million gallon plants. So what you're looking at there is the amount of biomass required every minute and a half when this industry grows. So biomass, remember, the mass will be huge. Here. IAGEN, the company that I work for, we are a biotech company, and according to DOE, we are the world's leader in this technology. DOE had 4 people up with us for 2 days late last year, and they have decided that we are ready to go. And indeed, we have been producing ethanol from the cellulose and straw for just about 2 years now. The photograph on our right is our plant in Ottawa. It's million gallon capacity, tiny in the ethanol world, but still way above pilot. Whoops, get this right here. We've been working at this since the 1970s, 30 years. It took us a while to get there. We started out with 2 7 million pilot operations. We've moved along. Now we have this $30 million demonstration plant I showed you a picture of. We've had great support. Petro-Canada, Canadian oil companies, put in $20 million. We started out with a nice bit from the Canadian government, $15 million. That gave us a critical mass to attract a lot of good industry. Volkswagen earlier this year announced a partnership with us, and our big partnership is with Shell. They put in $50 million thus far, and this is a partnership that is really good. Besides the money, they've given us a lot of their quality people and people time. They take this industry, I can assure you, very seriously. It took us 30 years to develop this technology. I'll try and explain it in 30 seconds. On the upper right, we bring in the biomass material, we chop it fine, we give it a mild acid bath and steam treatment, turn it to porridge. We add the enzymes, and the saliva in your mouth is a typical enzyme that'll turn a soup cracker, the starch in that, into sugar in short order. Our enzymes do the same thing for cellulose. So we add the enzymes, and the sugar is produced. What's left over is the lignin. It goes into power production, provides all of our own energy for the plant, and perhaps exports some power to the grid. And once you have sugar fermentation, we have yeast that'll ferment all the sugars. Distillation is ancient technology, and you have cellulose ethanol. Oops, the demonstration plant, as I mentioned before, we've been producing ethanol for 2 years. I liken our state of the industry to the aviation industry. Our first bench tests were like the Wright brothers in their aircraft, flew a little bit. Then our 2 pilot operations were like the first time you could, an airplane could fly in a figure 8 without killing the pilot. And then we have our demonstration plant. I compare that to the Spirit of St. Louis. Lindbergh made it across the ocean. Everybody paid attention. Hey, this aircraft really worked. Now we are buying straw in Canada and southeast Idaho for a first commercial plant. We hope to have a shovel in the ground for about a 50 million gallon plant in about a year and a half from now. That's comparable to the DC-3. It was a good commercial airline. It made people money, still operating a bit today. But the future out there is an awful lot of wonderful technology ahead of us, such as the aircraft industry after the DC-3 first started to fly. We are supplying fuel to a Canadian government fleet right now. We have our own vehicles. It's still quite tiny, but there's a lot of vehicles going around with our ethanol in now. That's our plant right at the airport in Ottawa. The foreground is the enzyme facility, and behind there is our ethanol plant, which is a 5-story building. This is the business end, bringing in the straw. We just bring in, we have a straw broker, and we just bring in whatever the farmers are producing. We don't want to baby our enzymes. That's in our enzyme plant. That's in our ethanol plant. This is where we separate the lignin. At the, just a kind of a novelty, at the G8 summit last year in Scotland, all the official vehicles used our fuel. This is interesting. This is agricultural residue throughout the world. There's lots of it. W is for wheat, G is for grain, SC is for sugarcane, R is for rice. This is the U.S. NREL map of where you find agricultural residue, and California is quite well endowed. Certainly the corn growing areas and what have you. But it'll be when the industry takes off, it'll be you'll find it all through the U.S. US DOE and USDA did a survey about a year ago, or they completed a year ago. They maintain that there's over 1 billion tons of biomass available annually in the United States, of which some is agricultural residue and some will be dedicated crops. This basically means that there is a resource out there. Capturing it is not going to be a slam dunk. This material is going to be hard to gather, but it does exist. Every ton of biomass will produce about 75 to 80 gallons of ethanol with our current technology. This is what President Bush said about cellulose ethanol a few days ago, and if he said it, what I'm saying must be true. Benefits to agriculture. This is going to be quite profound. That if 60 billion gallons of ethanol are produced, this means that there'll be a 24 billion added boost to the farm revenue. Currently, soybeans and corn are tied at number 1 of crops at about $20 billion. So this could be the largest agricultural activity in the country. I talked about agricultural residue. Switchgrass today, basically the wild plant, you can get 5 tons an acre. The ethanol yield is 80 gallons a ton. Based on straw price, we'll pay about $15 a ton the windrow. That'll yield the farmer $75 an acre, which isn't much. A couple days ago, I was out at a company called Ceres, which are the in Thousand Oaks, and they're kind of the Johnny Appleseed of this industry. They're developing switchgrass and other plants for this industry, which are going to be quite profound. When I showed them this slide, they laughed at me and said, "We're already there, and we're going to get a lot better." But taking switchgrass and starting to move in the direction that they've done for corn and wheat, of taking wild plants and making them productive, they can increase the yield comfortably, double it. They can reduce the lignin and up the ethanol yield per ton to 100 gallons. I won't get too far into the economics of it, but very comfortably, the plants will pay an extra $10, $15 a ton for this material, which means the farmers in the windrow will get $25 a ton. Suddenly, his yield per acre is $250, which is very, very good in this day and age for the agricultural community. So the benefits to agriculture really are very substantial. And once you start to get into dedicated crops, a lot of the problems of a assured source of supply of the biomass are taken care of. We're talking about jobs here. Say you've got 1,000 plants. Eventually for a mature industry. This translates to 600,000 permanent jobs in rural America, where there are not a heck of a lot of jobs today, and they're good jobs. They're stable. There's a few fairly high-tech jobs, and when you get into a rural area, they say, "Hey, my son who just completed university can come back and be your manager for the biotech part of the project." had benefits to the environment. On the left is how much CO2 kilograms per gallon. Boy, we sure mixed the measurements there. But anyhow, on the left is how much CO2 is emitted from a gallon of gasoline. The middle two are from corn-fired conventional corn plants, quite an improvement. And the far right is how much CO2 comes out of cellulose ethanol. Consider that the biomass is large, it has very little carbon debt associated with it. There's carbon debt in assembling it and bringing it to the plant. But as you will recall, we export some electricity to the grid, compensates for some of the carbon that's used to get the material there. And a whole group of studies on this, DOE and others, have come out to a range around practically zero incremental emissions of CO2. One of the things you could do if this industry took off, the United States would leave the Kyoto signature countries in the dust. The energy bill on paper is very, very good, but it's kind of slow getting started, but it was very well it was very good to our industry, if only it could be implemented. I get to Washington more often than I get to downtown Ottawa these days, but we've noticed in the last, say, well, certainly since the President's presentation, but even leading up to it, there's a quickened interest, an improved interest there in getting this industry off the ground. That's my last slide. I should just give you a vision of the company. We're looking to be a leader in this 1,000 plant development. As I mentioned, we've already got about 400,000 tons of straw contracted in southeast Idaho, a similar amount in Western Canada. We're looking at Germany. One place is going to be a first plant, and whichever jurisdiction comes up with the amount of government backing to share the risk will probably get the first plant. All three governments say we know there's going to have to be a risk-sharing approach to this, but it's we're ready to go. That technology is there. Shell have indicated that they want to be a serious equity provider in the first plant. U.S. Energy Bill provides for a $250 million loan guarantee for the first plant, provided the equity people put in 20%. So the things are coming together to launch this industry fairly quickly. Thank you for your attention.
The first question we've been asked to answer is what opportunities exist for new versus established companies to introduce new technology and more efficient sources of energy? The second is, do emerging energy technologies play a unique role in creating environmentally friendly, sustainable solutions versus simply providing new sources of energy? And the third is, how do environmental concerns affect the adoption of these technologies? I'll kick it off and then turn to the rest of the panel. I wanted to make a couple comments on Clipper Wind as an example. A colleague of mine came back from a wind energy finance conference yesterday in San Diego where he was one of the speakers. There were 450 people talking about how to finance wind projects. It just shows the level of interest in that technology. Look back over the last 6 years and the amount of renewable energy has been added to the grid in the U.S., about 85% of it came from wind. However, as we heard last night, the biggest wind manufacturers are other than GE, are all offshore. And GE and Vestas, who are the two biggest ones selling in the U.S., are sold out for the next 2 years. And they can pretty much name their price. So as someone who buys from the wind industry and wind developers, we will look forward to having companies like Clipper come in and bring in new technologies and new hardware. So I think there's a real role there for small companies like that to contribute. Turn to the panel for any other. Chuck?
Sure. On the first question, are there opportunities for new technologies versus established technologies? I'm a partner in a venture capital fund based in Boston, Massachusetts, who invest in these technologies. So we have a passionate belief that the answer is yes to this. A couple quick reasons why. And then a few examples of what those opportunities might be. First of all, we believe we're living in an era of technological revolution that directly can impact energy markets. Advances in material science, of which UCSB is, of course, one of the global centers of excellence, are creating a host of new enabling materials. We live in an era where we're going beyond silicon, for instance, into the realm of wide bandgap semiconductors that enable things like solid-state lighting and a host of other things that reduce the amount of energy we use for certain everyday functions. There's in the technology realm as well, there's a cross-pollination between different scientific disciplines. And we are also experiencing this migration to the miniature. We no longer just can observe the behavior of materials at the atomic level, we can manipulate and build around them. So that's stimulating the whole nanotechnology revolution, which has relevance here. The technology breakthroughs play out against a backdrop of some big macro forces which have been referred to. We've got glowing population growth, we've got strains on certain finite natural resources like hydrocarbons and clean water. And we're pushing the restorative power of ecosystems to absorb the waste materials and emissions that industrial society is stressing them with. That is producing both an environment that emphasizes technical innovation, but also some policy formulation that is helping to drive these markets as well. Not as much in some cases as some of us would like to see in a perfectly enlightened world, but nonetheless, regulators, legislators, and populations are insisting on ever higher quality standards for their air and water. We see people embracing renewables has been discussed. And at least in the United States, this emphasis on energy security, which is somewhat of a new concept these days, is driving us to look at new sources and ways to create greater efficiencies from the things we already use. So, if that's why, just a couple quick areas where we believe these opportunities exist. In the area of generation, again, we're seeing a very rapid growth of most of the major forms of renewable energy. We're starting from a low baseline, but 30% per year compound annual growth rates are something that excite venture capitalists most certainly. We're getting the generators that we use to be both smaller and more efficient. An extreme example of which is not just small distributed and efficient generating technologies, but micro-generation. As my teenage children believe they have a God-given right to watch full-length color motion picture movies on their cell phones, we're reaching the outer limit of battery technology to provide that power, so we're converting to energy generation technologies that fit in that very small form factor as opposed to energy storage technologies. In the realm of transmission and distribution of both electrons and hydrocarbons, we have an opportunity to embed a lot of new technology in the electric power grid. It's a $300 billion legacy resource. It suffers severe underinvestment. It's relying on technology and critical pieces of equipment that are 50 years old. And there's a lot of technology already developed for other networks, fiber optic networks and others that can be embedded in the electric grid and increase its efficiency and self-healing and interactivity. Similarly, there's a lot of opportunity for smart meters. We don't meter our electricity use with much granularity, and there's a lot of benefit that can come from that. There's a lot that's happening in energy storage. Flint Craig from Penadyne will talk to you about their flywheel company. There are nanotechnologies, the storage of hydrogen and carbon nanotubes that people are working on, as well as advanced battery technologies. And then there's the whole realm of process and prevention technologies applied to our energy generating resources. There's a lot of work being done on multi-pollutant control technologies that can more efficiently scrub flue gas for all the various contaminants that we now want to control for. Frank Alex from PowerSpan will be talking about that a little bit later today. Alec Wadke spoke last night about the role of catalysis and the opportunities there. So that's an area we watch very, very closely, and there's a related discipline there too, and that is deposition, because catalysis is in many ways about surface area, and if you can get a more highly structured surface with greater surface area and a more precise deposition of your catalytic material, you can get greater efficiencies. And there's an area of carbon capture and carbon conversion and things like that too that present opportunities. So I'll just stop with question one.
Thanks, Hal. To build on what Chuck was saying, and to address some comments that relate most specifically to the Kanarka presentation from Howard, which I thought was really exciting. I think with respect to the question regarding whether these are truly transformative technologies, whether they can change the way we think about energy, I think the answer is yes. And I think the area of flexible solar photovoltaics is partly because of the roll-to-roll processing, which does have the capacity to lower cost, but also because it has the possibility to open our imaginations wide. I get very excited when I dream about being able to wear a solar cell. I get excited when I talk about our work and people come to me and they say, I'd like to make a sail for a sailboat out of your flexible materials. I get excited when I hear that we only need to cover 0.1% of the US's area to harness as much power as we need. And that sounds like a lot of area, but then when people say we've actually already paved that fraction of the US with roadways. So when you have a technology where you can kind of just roll out the solar carpet, I think it's very exciting. Now the challenge at the moment, of course, is with respect to efficiency. Can we find a way to unite these potentially transformative technologies with good enough performance to make them useful? And I thought, building on Howard's presentation, I'd just leave you with a few comments from the research side of the world, where I and other people are working hard to try to advance the efficiency of these technologies. And to put it in a nutshell, the good news is that we haven't run out of good ideas, and we haven't run out of good things to try. And in fact, the field of solution process physically flexible solar cells is an incredibly lively and dynamic one. And just to give you a few examples of what we haven't done yet, but we think we could do. We haven't run out of spectrum to harvest. We're doing a reasonable job of harvesting the visible part of the spectrum, and nearly all solar cells have not yet touched the infrared. In fact, it was just a year ago that the first report of a solution processed infrared solar cell came out, and that was the first, and it wasn't efficient. And so there's huge room to improve our efficiency in harvesting the infrared portion of the sun's power, and that is half the sun's power reaching the Earth. So that is already a factor of 2 opportunity. Howard referred to the fact that we can use organics and that presents some very attractive features from the environmental standpoint potentially. And I'd like to add that we can also work with inorganics and we can merge the two things together, and that some of the most exciting work is at the interface between the organic and the inorganic worlds. Inorganics does not have to mean toxic. Silicon and germanium are both examples of inorganic materials that are outstanding semiconductors that can now be synthesized colloidally and can be spread on like goop onto another material and can potentially be solar capturing materials. And so we should not restrict ourselves, in my view, to a particular category of materials, but we should be broad in our thinking, and we are being broad in our thinking about uniting those two worlds. We don't have to use electrochemical methods alone, though I think that's a very promising area, but there are pure solid-state device architectures in which we can work successfully. And in fact, there are pure organic and there are stable solar cell architectures that have been realized by the Alivisatos group and then subsequently in the infrared by my group in the past couple of months that prove that we do not, if we are concerned about the longevity of certain organic strategies, we are not forced to rely on those. And perhaps to leave you with 2 other, I think, exciting future points that build on Chuck's comments about the possibilities of nanotechnology. We do not have to restrict ourselves by any means to a planar architecture, to something that is flat. And therefore we can break the compromise between thickness, absorbance, and transport. And I've had incredibly stimulating discussions with the Stuckey group over the past couple of days while at UCSB on using some of the leading ideas in the area of mesoporous nanomaterials architectures to capture as much light from the sun as we possibly can and then to transport the energy out as efficiently as possible. We have definitely not yet reached the limits of what we can do on that front. And finally, with respect to some other really exciting science that's going on that has tremendous practical utility, over the past few years, NREL and Los Alamos researchers have initially predicted that we can get more than one excited electron for every photon that comes from the sun. And therefore, we have further possibilities to improve the efficiency of our solar cells by significant amounts. They have then subsequently shown that that process works experimentally. But nobody yet in the published literature has shown that we can actually use those multiple excitons generated by single photons in order to drive more power from solar cells. But the good news on that is that we and many other groups around the world see that as one of the most exciting challenges of both curiosity and application-driven research. And there is a race on to be the first to show that multi-exciton generation can be useful, and I think we'll succeed.
Thank you. Richard?
I'd like to draw our attention back to biomass. We heard Maurice Sladek's talk creating transportation fuels from biomass. He referred to the fact that there have been authoritative reports assessing what could be the supply of biomass in the United States, the billion-ton report, what could be produced annually. Other reports have said, does there enough land exist that would not compromise food? And the answer is yes. And so other groups believe that with the application of biomass and regenerating ethanol from it in one form or another, maybe 30, maybe 50% of the US transportation fuels could be realized. Now, underpinning all of that, of course, there does have to be a lot of innovation. Morris's company has relied hitherto on cellulose waste coming from crops, as he said, wheat straw, some barley straw. There is a lot of that waste in the United States, and undoubtedly it will be used. But at the end of the day, the economics are not particularly favorable for a number of reasons. And one of them is that the density of it on the ground is not high enough, and indeed that's only going to cover part of the land and part of the amount that's required. So he mentioned the necessity to generate dedicated energy crops. Now, there are such crops, but really the whole field is in its infancy. What is envisaged here is that switchgrass, as mentioned by the President, a native prairie grass that's capable of growing on very poor land with minimal inputs. It's a perennial, very deep roots, could be harvested year in, year out as a forage crop to supply the feedstocks for plants such as Morris referred to. That plant would not be grown on land used by food. It would be in addition. And the energetics of production and the economics are very favorable. Now, that is a plant that has not been received the attention of plant breeders. It's in its native genetic state. And wherever man has got to employing the principles of plant breeding, he's been able to make many improvements. So in terms of what entrepreneurial input needs to be made to bring this about, it's certainly the entrepreneurism associated with plant breeding to increase the yields up to levels that would make the economics very favorable. Now, in today's world, that entrepreneurism and plant breeding involves a lot of biotechnology, a lot of knowledge of genetics, of genes, of genetic engineering, and that's what I happen to do. And there's no shortage of genes known that can affect photosynthesis, affect leaf size, affect numbers of leaves, affect the ability to withstand drought, the ability to grow on salts, and so on and so forth. And those are the innovative improvements that is going to drive the opportunity of delivering these specialist dedicated energy feedstocks into the marketplace to allow these 1,000 energy plants, bioethanol plants, to churn out the ethanol. Under the heading of entrepreneurs, I would also remind us all that farmers are indeed entrepreneurs. They are looking to get every dollar that they can out of their land. And there's a large fraction of them in the United States today, and of course all over the world, who are not making much money. they would welcome the opportunity to use their land for purposes such as transportation fuel production. And because they're entrepreneurs, they will bring a lot of entrepreneurs into how to get the best out of the land in a sustainable way with these plants. And harnessing all those entrepreneurs, I think, is part of this dream, part of this vision. They're necessary, they're essential. The result would help the rural economy. So I think those of us who are interested in photosynthesis and harnessing it through what nature does with plants have got our eye very much on bringing biotechnology, genetic improvements to create plants which are as well designed for releasing energy as the modern corn plant is for producing grain.
Thank you. Professor Lee?
Okay. I just want to make quick comments and suggestions on those three aspects of the topic. The three speakers already give our very nice presentations. First, for PV, I think a key issue is still material technologies. But at the moment, I think plastic organic PV is a very good direction, but I think more conventional silica-based PV is still a very interesting direction. People still need to develop that one. And also the people still try to develop the even high efficiency, like 50% of the solar utilization efficiency. Try to concentrate the solar light to a small piece of PV, and they will reduce the price dramatically. For the wind power, I think, as I know from China, one of the things you need to develop the energy storage technology for some remote place. During the night time, you don't use that much electricity, and you need to store it, that energy, and then that would be very interesting. Yeah. For biomass conversion, certainly it's to be a very promising opportunity. But I'm just worried about that technology you mentioned. Enzyme is not universal catalyst for all the different kinds of biomass. It's very selective. And also the difficult thing for most of the biomass, difficult to decompose the lignin and the cellulose, and after the reaction you have a lot of waste water, and you have a lot of difficult thing to decompose behind. So my suggestion is, if you can combine the photocatalytic technology, as I mentioned yesterday, and to treat the wastewater and combine with your enzyme technology, and that will, I think, be survival. And otherwise, you have a lot. Even that technology principle is an environmental process, but actually will produce a lot of wastewater. Okay.
Final words for us?
I've been doing science for a little over 60 years. And so perhaps the most useful contribution I can make here is to try and give a long-term perspective on this issue of emergent technologies and innovation. So let me start with something that I saw in the Scientific American just very recently, and then I'll go way back. So very recently I saw an ad in the Scientific American, covered two whole pages, namely the page behind the front cover and the next page. Now on the page behind the front cover, this was an ad by Chevron, it said for every 2 barrels of oil that are produced, 1 barrel of new oil is found. That gives you something to think about. On the second page, this was elaborated, but it was the first page that really caught my eye, because I remembered it's not more than 3 or 4 years ago that Chevron had full-page ads that said, here's what we're doing, we're exploring this and we're exploring that, and you have nothing to worry about until 2025. Well, it's interesting, 2025. They didn't comment beyond that. The latest thing that I saw, latest projections from the very, very conservative U.S. Department of Energy, is that, well, all hell may break loose in 2026. I mean, I mentioned earlier this morning this drop, right, where production decreases by a factor of 2 every 10 years. So my first remark is, I think we are really at a tipping point. The fact that a bureaucracy, a government bureaucracy that hadn't quite caught up yet, actually stopped us from making the statement that, when we made our film, from making the statement that we are addicted to oil, and a few months later, that's the lead statement by the president. So it's a time of great opportunity, but I would perhaps rather say of great necessity. It's not only that there are all kinds of possibilities, but we better do something about it. So people have often thought back, and I think it's in some ways a good comparison, to the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project, many of you will know the basic history. Nuclear fission was discovered just about the time that the Second World War broke out. The possibility of huge energies being released became scientifically known. There was a strong concern, and as it turned out, justified concern, that the Axis powers, particularly Germany, was developing nuclear weapons, and a crash program was started, the Manhattan Project, and it used the best brain power, the best scientific power, the best engineering capability, and in a matter of a few years, this threat of nuclear weapons being used by the Axis powers was countered successfully. The threat was countered successfully. What was done, to my mind, unsuccessfully, was that in fact, after the threat was countered successfully, we dropped 2 nuclear weapons on Japan. That's another story. Now, let me do a fast forward. Innovation. What was the greatest technological innovation most important in the last century? I think one can argue about that, but I think a very good case can be made for saying it was the transistor. I happened to be a young man with a junior faculty job at the time in Pittsburgh, and I come back to coal later, and I got a summer job at Bell Telephone Laboratories. I worked for Bill Shockley, who was the leader of the group that developed the transistor. What lesson can we learn from that true revolutionary moment when the first transistor was demonstrated? I think we can learn something very important. At Bell Labs, I subsequently worked there, I think, altogether 12 summers, so I became a sort of an in-house fixture. The remarkable thing, which was, I think, essential to the kind of invention which the transistor represented, and to many of the other things that were produced at that lab, was there was an incredible continuity and effective continuity with excellent intercommunication from the most pure science to the telephone. It was a remarkable sequence of steps. People from a pure science department, after a while they became more interested, certain of them became more interested in applications. They moved into the department, so to speak, applied science into the next level, and finally Western Electric that actually made telephones. I don't think that has ever been quite replicated, this successful continuity from pure science to manufacture. I think when we are speaking about opportunities today, we should keep this in mind as another excellent model and excellent lesson from history. Some of us, myself, I consider myself a pure scientist, but I have, I guess, from the first time during the Second World War that I worked in a plant that manufactured aircraft electrical instruments. I've always just happened to enjoy enormously using pure science for the most practical applications. I think we should encourage this in our educational programs. That interplay between pure science and practical applications. Now, you will, in a few hours, I'll present a film to you, and so many of my ideas are in fact incorporated in that film, so I will not take any longer time now. I think you will see there people, again, pure scientists. Bell Labs will figure again, because it was also the place where the modern photovoltaics were first produced, and then it will take you right up to the present and even into the future. So I'll let the film say the rest on my behalf. Thank you.